Better? Hi. Okay, that sounds just fine. Hi. I was reminded of the existence of this shrimp radio, and it makes me very happy, to see the shrimp after like a whole year of ignoring them. Can you even imagine like what it might be to be a shrimp, just kind of filtering all through the day? Doesn't sound bad to me. So we are going to jump into Photoshop again. We're going to be doing something a little bit different with Photoshop today, if I just scroll down here. We're going to be starting this week, we're going to be doing GIF animation in Photoshop. Oh, it's my favorite thing to do with the Photoshops. So yeah, it's definitely like if you're looking for an opportunity to text something to your friend and be just like nail the joke, a GIF is definitely a good way to do that. So today I'm going to show you two different methods of making stuff with GIFs. I do just want to say super quickly that last week I had some serious difficulty seeing the screen. So if you're catching up from home, you are looking at a video from last semester in which I did not have such vision problems. So today I've gone ahead and I've changed the screen resolution a little bit just to make it a little bit easier for myself. So if you're noticing that things look a little bit larger on the screen, there's a reason for that. And it's for everyone's benefit, so that work out. So as I said, we're going to jump into two different ways of making GIFs. And basically, there are two sort of ways in a nutshell that you can do this. One is to use the photo burst function on your phone. Even if you don't have a smartphone, most cameras will shoot at a fairly quick rate. So even just a traditional SLR camera, do you remember those? That's like a thing that takes pictures that you can't actually make phone calls with. Yeah, one of those. You could potentially use one of those too if you wanted to. But for this purpose, actually, the smartphone is really well suited to shooting at a pretty rapid frame rate. And the reason that it is such is because your smartphone obviously also has the capability to do video. So it's really just taking video and storing it as stills. So this is a photo burst that I took on my phone a while back. I have an Android phone, as some of you may already have learned. And so on an Android phone, what you will get is, at some point, it will dump a bunch of photos onto Google Photos. Most people who have Android set up Google Photos to receive their photos. And then you can download the photos as a group, usually as a zip file. So this is what I get when I download those photos. And here we are. It's my partner using a drill. I wanted something very simple for the purposes of this demonstration, so we could clearly see whether things were going in the right direction. And basically, as you can see, drill goes up, drill goes down. Very complex. So now, that being said, pretty simple action, but it looks like right now I have about 37 frames. So one thing I guess I would caution you about a little bit is if you are using the burst function in your camera, don't forget that if you put your finger on there, it's going to get a lot of frames. It could easily get up into the hundreds or thousands even, depending on how long you hold your finger on the button. So that's not necessarily a problem, but at some point you might hit the wall of what Photoshop can handle in terms of just the sheer number of frames. So you can kind of notice that I'm trying to, in this demo, that I'm kind of working with a smaller set of frames. And when you work with a smaller set of frames, let's say under 50 maybe, Photoshop is not going to give you any crap at all. It's when you get into much longer animations that they become kind of problematic in Photoshop. Of course, that's also related to the resolution, but we'll talk about that in a second. So basically, yeah, I have this stack of frames. So what I can do is I can bring it into Photoshop, and we can actually start Photoshop from scratch here. I'm going to just quit out of what I'm doing. Certainly does seem to be taking its sweet time at the moment. There we go. I'm a patient person. So let's see. If we start up Photoshop cold, that will hopefully be, that looks startlingly like Galadriel from Rings of Power, by the way. I just noticed that. So anyway, basically what we're going to do is we're not going to do anything in this window, which is probably typically what you've done up to this point. We're going to go up here to the File menu, and we're going to use the Automate function, the Scripts function, and we are going to opt for Load Files into Stack. And what this is going to do is it's going to take that stack of frames and it's going to import each image in as a layer in Photoshop. So what we'll wind up with is a file that has 37 layers. So allow me to demonstrate. So it opens up this window. You can browse to where your stack of files are. And we will just go ahead and do a select all here. You can also just select the folder, and then we'll click OK. And this will definitely take a second, and that time will vary according to the resolution of the photos and also just the number of photos you have in the stack. But you can see they're coming in. And so now that this thing has stopped churning, we can sort of continue with the sort of business of the day. So one thing that I would recommend that you do before you sort of start making a GIF is I would recommend that we maybe lower the resolution of this a little bit, because 37 images at this resolution is kind of a lot. It's not going to have a great system performance. And I guess the other reason I would maybe turn the resolution down a little bit is because GIFs are notoriously sort of a lower quality media. So do people make extremely high quality GIFs and show them on gigantic screens? Yes, definitely. Do people also make GIFs that are like 50 by 50 pixels so that you can see them on your phone? More of that. That's definitely more the case. So I'm just going to res it down because we're basically kind of making this to share. And as we know, especially if we're sharing it through mobile data networks, they're kind of not super reliable. You're not guaranteed to have a super fast data connection here in Wisconsin. Let's just go Wisconsin. So I'm going to lower it down to maybe like 500 pixels wide. And so it's still big enough that I could see it on the screen, but it's definitely like quite a bit smaller. It's gotten almost 30 times smaller if you look at up here at the image size. And so this automatic resampling is fine, and I'll just click OK. To answer the question that you may or may not be asking in your mind, can I scale it down later? Yeah, totally. You could totally scale it down later. I'm scaling it down now because I don't really want any delays to come up in this process, because your time is precious. Yes? So yeah, when you do image size, it will scale the entire image. That's a great question, and if we just look at a bunch of different layers, you can see that they're all scaled down. So image size actually will scale the entire file. If you wanted to scale just the layer, you would probably use the transform controls. So you would enable these transform controls and then scale it manually. Okay, so now we have a bunch of layers. We still don't have really any kind of thing going on. I'm going to hide this so I can make it visible. What we need to do to kind of advance our cause a little bit further is we need to create a timeline in Photoshop. So if you're sitting at home or just sitting out there, you might be thinking, yeah, I don't have a timeline. Right, so go to Window, and then you can bring up your timeline right there. Also, I just want to say that I'm having fun seeing everything today. Whoops. Sort of. So yeah, so this is great. I don't really need this little thing, but I could probably just dock this back here, and then now it's sort of all together as one window. Okay, so if this button says create video timeline, go ahead and just click the button next to it and toggle it over to create frame animation, and then click the button. Whoa. Okay, so again, intermediary step, not too exciting. It doesn't really look like we've gotten much done. What's going on right now in the timeline? It looks like it's imported the first layer in our stack, and it has made a single frame. So that's not super utterly useful. So the next step is to make frames from layers. And what this is going to do is it's going to take the layer stack, and it's just going to make a frame for every single layer in the stack. Okay? Boom. And so now we can do exciting things like play this. Here, let me zoom on it a little bit. One palette I'm going to bring up is the Navigator palette. We haven't really talked about it, but it's probably one of my favorite palettes. It's really good for kind of just zooming and moving things around. And I'm going to put my timeline palette back down here. And so now we can basically play it through. And you can see it just is auto-looping. That auto-looping is this button down here. You can make it play through once if you want. It's got a couple of other options, but here now it's playing through once and then it's not playing again. So if I wanted to make this into an animated GIF, I mean, I guess I could call myself done. Probably there might be some other adjustments that I would want to make though. And if I just play through with it looped, you should probably be able to get a sense of the fact that when it loops, it sort of starts over at the beginning, which is a little bit annoying. I think we could get it to loop a little bit more smoothly. Another thing that I'm thinking is that it just has a few too many frames. So when you do a photo burst or when you even shoot video, it's using a fairly high frame rate. And GIFs, as we know, are sort of famous for being kind of low quality. So GIFs tend to have a much lower frame rate. So what does that mean? Well, we have a frame rate probably of about 30 frames a second on your photo burst function. So we could probably get rid of half the frames, and you probably would not be able to tell the difference because the GIF compression just gets rid of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm just going to select all of the even numbered frames. And this will take me just a second. But it is going to reduce my frame count in half. So also what happens when your frame count gets reduced by half? It means your file size also gets reduced by half. And I have to tell you, some people ask me, oh, do I need like so many frames to make this animation? I have seen some of the most brilliant, successful GIF animations that are made of only 2 frames. So there is no requirement on how many frames you need. It's more sort of about the overall impact, right? So there are some GIFs that are very economical that are also really, really compelling. So now I'm going to go ahead and delete these frames. I have to do it from this menu over here on the side. Delete frames, yes please. And okay, so now I'm in a situation where I have half the number of frames. Does it go a little bit faster? Yes, it appears to go a little bit faster, twice as fast, as a matter of fact. And does it sort of seem to have any noticeable drop-off in quality? Not really. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take these frames that we have left, and I'm going to just copy and paste them. And when you copy and paste the frames, you have to do it from this side menu. You can't like right-click stuff and have it sort of bring up the same list. So if I paste the frames now, I can paste them after the selection, which is what I want. And you may be kind of rightly thinking, like, that's brilliant, Meg. That's exactly the same thing as was happening before. Aha, that is true. So I'm going to take the frames that I just pasted, which happen to be frames 20 through 38, and I'm going to flip them in the other direction by clicking reverse frames. And so what that's going to do is it's just going to create like that little whoop. I'm going to go back up now. And I have to say I'm not super crazy about that double pump right there, right? So this might be a good time for us to maybe manually actually delete some frames. So it looks like I can kind of go through here and so I'm just checking to see where that happens, and it looks like it happens right here. So this is where kind of animation in general can get really detail-oriented. I'm not going to spend a lot of time like tweaking this out to make it perfect, but probably we could maybe just delete these 4 frames, and that little would be gone. When we do our next example, I'm going to get much more into sort of like tweaking out individual frames. But in any case, I'll just go ahead and get rid of them right now and see. So one thing that you might find slightly frustrating about the timeline window is that things that you think would normally work, like just hitting the delete key, it doesn't actually delete. You have to come over to this side menu and actually kind of make it happen. So now we have that sort of offensive frame in there. We definitely want to get rid of that. So let's get rid of you. So it's a little bit smoother. You could literally spend hours and hours and hours like getting some of those minute changes out of an animation. For my game project, I've been working on an animation, and I probably shouldn't tell you how much time I've spent on just getting something to sweep back and forth in a way that I have to be like just perfect, you know? So yeah, maybe I'll break that out next week at some point. But in general, I mean, animation is something that you'll kind of just get a feel for it. This could potentially be finished. We could certainly apply filters to the layers. We can do all kinds of interesting things to the layers. One thing I want to draw your attention to before we move on to the next sort of project is that go ahead and take a look at the So notice that when we stop on this frame, that this layer is visible. And as I kind of walk down the frames, see what happens in the layers palette? That's because for each frame, I'm busy. That's because for each frame, there's something that's visible, right, in the layers palette, and there's that correspondence. Here, the correspondence is really obvious. It's like 1-to-1. So from frame to frame, we're just climbing up the layers palette. But when we get into the next example, you'll see that what you choose to have visible or invisible per frame is kind of like wide open. You can have any set of layers you want. So let's go ahead and sort of, this is like your bare bones simple solution, and then the thing that I'm going to show you moving forward is a little bit more advanced. So I went up to File, Export, and Save for Web. The Save for Web dialog box is something that does some kind of old school things in Photoshop, and by old school, I mean like maybe Web 1.0, 2.0, which happens to work really well for stuff like animated GIFs because, that's what GIFs are for. So, so it's no sort of mystery that we're using the Save for Web dialog box to save this GIF. So there are a couple of things that you probably want to note. One is that this is also a place where you can change the image size of the exported GIF. Okay? Another thing is that you can play around with all sorts of color options to compress the GIF. So if you want like a super grungy sort of Internet 1 dithered GIF, this would be the way to do it. Just lower those colors down, and you'll get that sort of grungy, old internet effect. If you want it to look as nice as possible, then definitely have as many colors as possible, because that's how GIF compression works. It reduces the number of colors in each frame. So again, you can scale down the image here. I'm just going to hit Save, and I'm just going to save this as I normally would. And one thing that you want to absolutely make sure when you click this box is that you want to make sure that this says images only. If you do any of the other options, it will make you your very own useless web page to go along with your GIF, which you don't want. So definitely images only there. And now I should be able to go into preview, and the Mac OS is really nice about previewing GIFs. Sometimes, if you're on a Windows machine, or if maybe you have your preferences in Mac OS a little bit wacky, that's a technical term, don't be afraid to open these up in Chrome. So a lot of times, students will say, hey, I just saved my GIF, and it looks great in Photoshop, but it's not animated when I try to play it. My suggestion for that situation is, have you opened it up in Chrome? And the reason for that is because just different software and different preview methods are not really optimized for GIFs. But what do we know works with GIFs? An internet browser, right? So Chrome is going to be much more sort of forgiving. And we will be looking at these in Chrome to evaluate them. So as long as they run in a web browser, that's all that we really care about. All right, well, so let's go ahead and take a look at another technique. Probably if that were my project, I would have saved it as a Photoshop document, just so I could have gone in later. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with I'm going to start with a static image. So this is an image that has no frames, it has no photo, there's nothing else except for this image. So probably I'm going to totally ignore my timeline palette for just a while. In other words, I'm going to work in the layers palette. So I think what would be really awesome right now is if I could basically take this vulture and I could maybe remove the vulture from the background. Okay, so we should all hopefully have some idea of how to do that. So I'm going to grab my magic wand tool. I think it would be easiest to grab the outside in this case, the background, and now I can either select inverse or I could just make a layer mask. But wait, if I'm kind of thinking forward for this a second, so we've got the vulture in a layer mask, or we will very shortly. What is it going to be moving on? Is it going to just be like moving on a white rectangle background? No, I think it would be really interesting if we could move it along the sky, which means that we need more than one layer, because we need a layer for the sky and we need a layer for the vulture. So no problem there. I'm just going to take this layer and duplicate it. And then I'm going to go ahead and take the layer mask on the top layer. So in this case, I want to hide the selection. And now you can see I've got this with a layer mask, and then down here I've got still the sort of base layer that I had before. So how would I get this vulture out of here? There's a couple different ways. Actually, I'm going to show you a way that is very closely related to what we did in class on Thursday, which is using the patch tool. So I'm basically going to treat this this vulture like a giant hunk of dust. And I'm just drawing a box or drawing a shape around it with the polygonal lasso tool. And now I can take that shape, and if I grab the patch tool, now does anybody want to help me out of this jam? I know exactly what's wrong, but it would be probably good to just train your eyes. Yeah? Right, classic. I'm on the layer mask. So in order to use the patch tool, I have to get back onto the actual photograph, which, that's just, that's definitely a problem. And then also I was not even selecting really the right layer. I was selecting an inactive layer. Got to keep you all on your toes. So yeah, basically I can just drag this over, and those lovely, lovely algorithms are just going to take care of it. So wonderful. There's another related pattern, or another related tool that you can use to the patch tool. If you make a large selection like this, you can go into Edit, Content-Aware Fill is another technique that you can use. And it looks right now like my screen resolution is not allowing me to click OK. So basically, you would just click OK if you got into this situation. But the content-aware fill is also a really nice tool to use. And it's definitely something that I would consider using. So I'm going to go ahead and just escape out of that. So yeah, let's go back to where the patch tool basically just fixed that layer. And so now what I have is something like a background layer. And I also have this layer of the vulture. And if I activate that, this vulture layer is just kind of hanging out. I can move it wherever I like. It does look like there's a little blip in it, so I'm just going to go over to my layer mask real quickly and get rid of that. And whatever else is on there is actually on my screen. Sometimes it's hard to tell. So, okay. Now, basically, this layer is kind of ready to be animated. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start over near the side, near the corner. maybe like over here. And I'm going to duplicate this layer several times. I'm not going to duplicate it too many times because if I have a ton of frames to work with, that just seems like more potentially unnecessary labor. So I think I'm going to go for 5 copies of this. And you can see right now they're all co-located in the same spot. But if I grab any one of these layers, just put them in numerical order for the sake of my own sanity, I should be able to just kind of move through and grab these layers and place them into some sort of a motion path. And so if you're thinking about working with animation, I'm just going to rotate some of these as well. This would be also, by the way, a great moment for that right click. Once we accept that transformation, now I can do that right click and sort of get on the right layer. So this one looks good to me. I'm just going to rotate these kind of into place so that it looks like they're almost like gradually rotating. And then this one, I think, will go maybe like that. And then this one can go down there. And basically what we're going to get is some sort of like flyover effect. So notice what I did here. One thing that I did was I kind of used the transparency of the layers to sort of visualize how they look in relation to each other, right? So that's definitely something that is worthwhile to do. I also did not create the timeline animation ahead of sort of figuring out the basic distribution, right, of where I wanted stuff. So now I could go in and create my frame animation and do that thing where I make the layers come over. So I can say make frames from layers. And that will dump them all in there. And it'll be mostly right. So there's going to be one other thing that we have to do here. So we definitely have some motion happening, but what's really going on here? Well, we're kind of doing something a tiny bit tricky, and that is that what we want is we really would like this frame, layer 0, to be at the background of all of the frames, right? So basically what we have to do is we have to go in for each frame and make layer 0 visible. And you can see as we go through each frame, it's kind of crawling its way up in terms of the vultures. And here I'm going to make layer 0 visible as well. So that's looking much, much better. Now, could I have a smoother looking animation? Yeah, I could totally double the number of frames, and that would make it twice as smooth. It's just a sort of question of what you're willing to put up with as an artist. And so if it's not that important to you that it be super smooth, if you're going for kind of like an old school look, then don't worry about it. I've seen students, that is, make animations that had up to 200 frames, and believe me, they are like heartbreakingly beautiful. But unfortunately, we just don't really have the time allotted in this class for the demonstration of that. So one other thing that I wanted to show you is I'm going to make just like a little, yeah, that's my boy. I'm going to make a little invasion here, just to kind of show you how those layers and frames work. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a really quick and dirty selection with the object selection tool. And now I'm going to make a layer mask. So I want to reveal that selection. And lo, I have a little paw. So I'm going to drag that little paw in here. And it looks like a couple of things are going to happen. I'm definitely going to have to go to my move tool and scale it up a bit. It's also going to need to be rotated because I think I would like to deal with it like that. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of make this full size and then kind of move it down. So it's going to come up from the bottom, basically. And sort of similar to the first image, I'd like to take this and I'd like to replicate it a couple times. So it's just going to pop up and then it's going to go away. So probably this first layer where it's just like barely peeking up, maybe we can get it up like that. Then I can go ahead and duplicate this. Now, when I move it on top of that layer, I'm sort of doing that for a couple reasons. Well, so first of all, let's just take a look at our frames here. So for frame 6, I'm pretty sure I actually don't want it visible for frame 6. Let's see what's happening here. Here is layer 1, and I think I just want this bottom instance visible. And then for layer 2, I think I would take this instance and maybe make it like halfway up. And then here, I'm going to need to duplicate this again. So it looks like, right. So now this one is coming in, and it's maybe up here. And I'll need one more instance. So here, I think I can get it to be like right on the thing. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this again. A good question right now might be something like, do I have to have it on top of stuff in the layers palette? That's a really good question. Here, in this case, we want the cat paw to be like on top of the bird, right? So it just makes sense that it's on top. Could it be on the bottom of the bird? Sure. Does it really matter? No, maybe not, but it's more an aesthetic decision. And now I think we should be able to, yep, there we go. So some other fun things that you can do with GIFs and sort of GIF timelines, one thing that I would seriously consider is making maybe a fill layer. So basically, kind of going back to thinking about these layers and what layers are on the screen, you know, for this frame, we could just go ahead and make a new layer. And right now, it's an empty layer. We could literally do anything on this layer, right, that you can do in Photoshop. So we could get some gigantic brush, and we could get some crazy color. And it would be nice if we could get a crazy color that was not black. There we go. And then we could maybe take this color sort of fade and use like an opacity blending mode. So maybe let's go to like, maybe like a soft light. And we could knock back the opacity to very little here. And basically what I'm sort of suggesting is you can take any layer and all you have to do is vary it in a sequential manner. And then you're in a space where you're basically animating. So here, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this layer. Right now, it looks like it's gone ahead and refreshed to almost all of my layers, which is not super helpful. But let's say we want to start maybe here. We can certainly take this layer, reduce it to maybe 11%, then take this layer and make this layer like 20-something%. And so you're basically kind of sneaking up on this sort of purpleness. I'm going to go ahead and not have this layer visible. Duplicate this layer. So the more steps that you have between the layers, the more sort of convincing that the fade is going to be. But this should get you sort of this is 3 steps. So you can see how it kind of like fades in, right? So you can do that with like any color, any object, and it's just sort of a matter of like how many frames you spread out that transition over. The more frames, the smoother, the nicer, more labor. Does anybody have any questions before we kind of move on for the day? Yeah. Yes. So, sort of. There's definitely like a way to make certain frames hold. So for example, if I wanted it to hold on this frame where the paw catches the bird, I could maybe make this one frame, I could make it half a second. So now you can see it'll kind of pause there, right? You can also just make all of your frames take longer. To get a faster animation, I mean, definitely having more frames will help because as you slow down the frame rate, it will appear to be a little jerkier. So yeah, I definitely sort of, yeah, there's no time limit on the GIF assignment, by the way. I mean, it could be just, the blink of an eye. And some of the best GIFs out there are GIFs that just, have 1 or 2 sort of transition shifts. Any other questions? Uh-huh.
You mentioned you saw some GIFs that do a lot with just 1 or 2 frames. Do you have any of those examples on hand?
Gosh. Probably, so next class, I'm basically showing GIFs for the entire class. So let's wait until Thursday. So one of my favorite GIFs of all time is probably just a few frames. I mean, it says it all. It just says so much with so little, Yeah, so I mean, I think that's probably actually not a terrible example of, there's like a style of editing GIFs where it's sort of extracting like a very small action and kind of blowing it up, right? So yeah, definitely those sort of GIFs would fall into that category. But I've also seen some really interesting abstract ones that are maybe, more like sort of not so much internet GIFs, but like arty GIFs that just involve like a transition from one scene to another. Any other questions? Okay, well, I will see you on Thursday. We're going to look at more GIFs. We're going to look at like all the entertaining GIFs and all the maybe not so entertaining ones. I will see you all then, and have a wonderful couple of days.